This is part 5 of creating a user and authenticating using Firebase. In this portion of the video, we are going to make sure that our app is aware that we are authenticating to it using Firebase. And we're also going to make sure that that authenticated user gets stored into Firestore. We'll also make sure that if the user exists, that it does not create a duplicate entry of that. Firebase is going to give us a method that's going to allow our app be aware when a user authenticates to it. So in the documentation, we have a manage users section, and in that section, there's a method called on-auth state change. And when we use that method, this allows our app to be aware when a user is authenticating or not. Now we would use this particular method in our app.js file, and when we are authenticated, we will then store that authenticated user into the database. Else, we're going to do some other type of instruction. Our app needs to be aware whether a user is authenticated or not. So since we'll be using the on-auth state change inside our app.js file, what we'll need to do is change this from being a function component to a class component. So it's aware of our state, and our state will be if the user is logged in or not. So I noticed I was missing the Bootstrap CSS, so I went and added that back into my app.js file. I'll turn this into a class component by changing out the function to say class, then the app extends component. Then I need to add the render, and inside the brackets, I'm going to move the return inside the brackets. Then at the top, I just need to import the component. Now if I save this, the app still should be working. So let's add the state to the app. I'm going to say constructor, and inside the brackets do super, and then this dot state, and my key is going to be current user, and I'm going to assign it to null. I am going to use the on-auth state change method from Firebase inside a lifecycle component, which is component did mount. We want to put that inside the component did mount because if our app refreshes, we don't have to worry about the authentication refreshing either. So the app will just always be aware if there's an authenticated user there or not. So I will say component did mount, and in between the brackets, this is where I'm going to put the on-auth state change subscription. And that is in our manage user documentation. And I need to just update the code because I named that method just to be auth. And these parameters, you can change these to make more sense to you if you need to. I'm just going to change that to say authenticated. And for us to test this out, I'm going to console.log the authenticated user. Now I do need to bring in that auth from the Firebase. And what we should get back is a object of the authenticated user from Google. So I'm back inside my app and I'm going to sign in with Google. And what I get back is that user object that I authenticated with. And on it are a bunch of properties that we can use, because you can use this for different things. You don't have to just use this for, React project. So the properties that we care about are going to be, display name, email address, and for the users to be unique, we need a user ID. And that user ID is down here. And then if we sign out, it tells us we have signed out, and if we refresh, that object is no longer coming back. Now that our app is aware if there's an authenticated user on it or not, we need to send that authenticated user to our database, into Firestore. So what we need to do inside the Firebase file is we need to create a function that will take that authenticated user and check to see if it already exists in our database. If it doesn't exist, then it will create that user based off of the properties that we pass into it. And those properties are the ones that we get off that object. So we only want to pass certain ones into there. First, we are going to create a asynchronous function, because this is going to be an API request. So we want to make sure that we're getting data back, or data is being sent before other requests are being made. So I'm going to just say export const, and I'm going to call this add user document. And the parameter is going to be the authenticated user. And then here I'm going to set up what I want to do with that authenticated user. I'm going to say if there is no authenticated user, then I just don't want to do anything. I want to stop doing any of this function. So I'm going to return. Next, what I want to do is I want to create a path for this authenticated user to be saved. And when I say path, that's also known as a user reference. So that's going to be where in the Firestore it is being saved. Inside of Firebase, I am in the Firestore area, our database. And the way that Firestore works is you have a collection, which is going to be, a group of everything, a collection of food, a collection of clothing, a collection of authenticated users. Then inside of that collection, you have documents. So the documents are each individual thing. So if you had a collection of fruit, then it would be pineapple, apple, grape. In this sense, a collection of users is going to be each authenticated user. So what we need to do is we need to create a user reference that is going to be tied to saving in a user's collection, and it's going to be saved off of our authenticated user ID. And we're using the user ID because we need a unique value for each item that's being saved. And each collection has its own unique ID, and then each document has its own unique ID. So in this section of collections would be the actual user being stored. So we'll create the user reference, and you can name this user ref or user reference. And we want to say Firestore, which is our Firestore method from above. Then we want to say document because we're creating a document. And then we want to list the path, which is that collection users, followed by the user ID. Hopefully this makes sense. So I'm also going to use string interpolation for the rest of the path because we're pulling the authenticated user ID off of the authenticated user that we're passing in to this function. So I'm going to use the ticks, and I'm going to say users, which is our collection of users, and then authenticated dot user ID. So once I have that, pretty much I can get a snapshot of this user reference, and this user reference can tell me whether or not this exists in our Firestore or not. So I'm going to create a variable for that, and I want to say snapshot and I say snapshot equals user reference dot get, which is part of just like a CRUD method where after I pretty much create this user, I'm going to get it. And or after I like create this path based off of the user ID, I'm then going to get it. And I also want to say await in front of there because it's a API request, so we want to make sure that this is done first before we try to get it. So I'm going to console.log the snapshot. So hopefully maybe this can make more sense what this code is doing. I want to use the add user document in my app.js file because when we mount, we want to be able to use that function right away. Now I need to change the on-auth state change method and turn that into an asynchronous function, and it will be an arrow function. And what it's saying is when or if I'm authenticated, that I want to use the add user document, and I'm going to call in my authenticated user. So I'm going to pass that in to that function that is in Firebase. And it automatically added it up here, so we didn't need to do that. And that's just because of that extension, that I was using. So you need to make sure you're importing it in. So now if we save this, we should be able to see that snapshot being logged into the console. So we see it's there. I'm just going to refresh. So this is the object that we get back, and you can look at the different properties and everything that's attached to it. So what we're going to be looking for in an exist property, and that is going to allow us to just save it into that path. So, and we'll only be saving it once, so we don't have to worry about saving multiple users of the same person. Back inside our text editor, we want to go to the Firebase file and we want to finish our add user document. So what we want to do is we want to check to see if a snapshot exists or not. So what we would do is we would say if a snapshot does not exist, we are going to go ahead and create this user and store them into the database. So if they're already there stored in the database, then we aren't going to create them. So what I'm going to do is then get the properties that I want to store. So I'm going to say const, and I'm going to get the properties off of the authenticated user that's signing in. So I'm going to get the display name, the email, and that's going to come from the authenticated user. And then I'm also going to get a timestamp. So I'm going to call that time created, and that's going to equal new date. Then what I need to do is do a try catch. So what I need to do is make sure that if I can create the user, that I create them into the database, and if I can't, then I get an error back. So that's why we're doing a try catch unless you do a then catch. So we'll say try catch error, and then we'll just console.log an error, say there was a problem. And we'll say error.message. So inside our try, we need to use our user ref to place the properties that we're calling off the authenticated user or any other properties that we're bringing in. So we need to do an await to just make sure that other task has already finished. So we'll do await and then user ref dot set, and then we're going to pass in the display name, the email, and the time created. So then outside of that catch there, we're going to just return our user ref. So we can save this and see if this works. So we don't have any user here except the user we created earlier. So I'm just going to refresh the app. And we get the snapshot still. We still get the snapshots showing up. Now, if we go back into our Firestore, we can see that there's an additional field there. And when I refreshed, it called on that function for us to be created. So I believe all we need to do now is do our register user, and that's going to be the same process pretty much as that Google sign-in, and then we just need to make sure we can log in with that registered user. And we'll go through those steps in the next video, and you can just challenge yourself as well and try to maybe add Twitter, add a phone number, add Facebook as other ways to authenticate. So see you in the next video.